Hey, welcome everybody to Spirituality Adventures. We're glad you're tuning into this episode. We are a viewer and listener supported podcast, so we really appreciate you listening, watching on YouTube. We really encourage you to subscribe to whatever platform you're using. If you're on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, or if you're on Apple or however you listen to a podcast, be sure and subscribe. We greatly appreciate it. Also, make comments if you like it and share it if you like it. We really need people to make comments and share the episodes that you like. And then also, if you're not already a supporter, we really would encourage you to go to spiritualityadventures.com and you can pick a tier, and we have bonus content for every type of giver. This is a nonprofit, so they're tax-deductible donations, but we do provide bonus content for those who are supporters. So be a part of the team, help support Spirituality Adventures, and we're so glad you're tuning into this episode. All right, hey, welcome everybody to Spirituality Adventures. Thanks for tuning into this episode, and I'm excited to introduce you to Chris Hanson. Chris and I met just a couple of years ago out in Wyoming at an OrtCon conference that Tom Ord puts on every year. It's a conference. It's a nerdy theological crowd, maybe 30, 40, 50 people who are almost all of them working on doctorates or have doctorates. And we're just talking nerdy theology, but it's been a really fun crowd. And Chris and I met and have seen each other there a couple of times. And then also, I'm a Disciple of Christ pastor, and we had our national convention in Memphis this past summer. This is December of 2025 where we're talking right now. And so we got to hang out and eat barbecue together in Memphis.
We did, yeah.
So that was fun, and kind of got to hear more about Chris and his wife and his ministry and his family. So Chris, thanks so much for being a part of Spirituality Adventures.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. It's great to see you again, Fred.
So Chris is not only an MD, but he is now a doctor of theology. And he graduated from Northwind. Tom Ord was one of his oversee, or what do you call him? Your dissertation, your advisor?
Dissertation advisor.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
In the book that you've come out that you did your work on,
yes,
called Open and Relational Parenting. Subtitle is Loving Parents Reflecting a Loving God.
Yes.
And I loved this book, and I'm excited to jump into it with you.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. That's great. I'm looking forward to talking about it.
Yeah. Well, it overlaps with pastoring and caring for people, even though I'm not a parent. You're a parent of two, and you've been working parent of two, right? You have two children?
That's correct. Yep. Yes, two girls.
And then they're adults now, but then you're still a pediatrician in Memphis, and have been working with children and parents your whole career.
That's right.
So you've added some deep, rich theological reflection. I will say that it is definitely the most theological and academic parenting book I've ever read.
For sure.
Of course, it's a product of a PhD dissertation in the open relational process theology. So yeah, let's first start just with a little bit of your history background, give people a little bit of context of your faith background in particular.
Okay.
And then kind of take us from that into what drew you to studying with Tom Ord and producing a book like this.
Yeah, thanks. Good question. So I grew up as in a conservative denomination and went to a conservative Christian college, Harding University, in Searcy, Arkansas, small town in Arkansas.
What denomination was that?
Church of Christ.
Oh yeah, the non-musical.
Correct. Well, yeah. They would say we're musical, we just sing, but
right.
Yes, exactly.
No instruments.
No instruments. That's exactly right. And over time, I would start to ask questions just like all of us do. And I think there's been two big times that I faced, kind of big theological questions, some in the early 2000s and some in the mid-teens, just maybe a decade ago. Some of those first questions probably relate back to the reason behind the book, so I'll kind of introduce them. And actually, preceding them in the late '90s, when I'm an early pediatrician out in practice, the church that we were attending at the time decided that they were going to do kind of a weekend of parenting seminar type work, and they bought a curriculum and they released some kind of advanced information on what they were going to be doing. And just reading through the curriculum, the little bit that I was able to before, I realized, hey, wait a minute, what the church is saying about parenting is really different than what I've learned in my training and what I'm teaching my families. And so it kind of created a dichotomy that was frankly a dichotomy that I just kind of agreed to live with for a little while. And then finally started asking, some different questions. And I'll fast forward quite a bit to that second time where I was asking some big questions, maybe a decade ago. And I start looking around, and by that time, Linda and I had already made some denominational moves, and we had kind of come to the church where we are now, which at that time was non-denominational, as you know. It just this year joined the Disciples of Christ, so we have that now in common.
Hmm.
But at that time, it was a non-denominational church, and they had this was pre-pandemic, so you did these large gatherings and so forth. So they had hosted an event where they had Pete Enns come and
Oh,
speak. Yeah,
wow.
and I had never heard of Pete Enns, and so they it was to talk. He was coming to talk, of course, about how to read the Bible for all it's worth, or one of those books in
Hmm.
particular. And I was a little skeptical because I thought, man, I'm going to go hear this guy and he's going to tell me that, I need to read like a chapter a day or this particular schedule to read through the Bible in 365 days. And it's going to not be that impressive and so forth. But then I met Pete Enns that we know, and I was kind of really blown away and started listening to Pete, which then led me to start paying attention to a lot of other things and other podcasts and books and open the door to a whole world that you and I have experienced through theology beer camp and so forth.
Yeah.
Actually, the first theology beer camp back from the pandemic, the one in Chapel Hill, was when I met Tom Ord, and it
Okay.
was soon after that. In the back of all his books, he has a little bit of an ad for his doctoral program. And so a few months after that meeting, I was flipping through one of his books and I saw that and I thought, wait a minute, this might be interesting because by that time I had learned enough about open relational and process theology to say it had a lot of ideas to offer parenting
Mm,
in a way that the theology that I had seen before in classical theism really don't, and in a way that those kind of theological ideas lead to the bad parenting advice that was the dichotomy that I was seeing.
right.
And so I contacted Northwind and the president at Northwind, and I said, I'm probably an atypical student and I probably don't meet any of the requirements, but just kind of wondering. And he said, well, let's get you hooked up to talk to Tom on Zoom and let's just see how this goes. And so I met with Tom, and next thing you know, I'm spinning him my idea of talking about parenting from an open and relational standpoint, and then suddenly I'm enrolled in school again. And
Yeah.
that was a few years ago. And then I was able to finish that this spring.
Excellent. Excellent. So, I want to jump into your book. All right.
Okay,
So,
good.
I, I just have a confession first of all, right up front is that, so I've never been a parent, but pastoring does have some parallels.
Sure.
And when I started I started a church in 1990,
Okay.
and all through the 90s, of course, it was a very young congregation. We had more kids than we had adults,
Okay.
and most of the men in my congregation looked like they came out of an 80s hair band. If you didn't have long hair in my church, you
Right.
would have felt out of place as a man. And
Hmm.
so it was kind of a crazy crew, and all of them were having kids and trying to figure out how to raise them. Of course, I'm directing them all to James Dobson, right?
Right.
and Dare to Discipline, and getting them connected to all of that. I have three younger sisters. I think they
Hmm.
all used Dobson to raise their. This is how we all raised our kids, right? With
Right.
an authoritarian parenting model. And so your book is, we're going to jump into that. The first chapter is on parenting research.
Hmm.
And for those who are viewing this thing visually, I'm showing a chart that you
Hmm.
deal with. So, how do you say the person's name that came up with this
Yeah. Diana
chart?
Baumrind.
Baumrind.
Baumrind. Yep.
Baumrind. Okay. And this is basically a styles of parenting that are kind of put into a graphic.
Hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about her scheme of
Yeah.
different styles of parenting and kind of give us those in layman's terms, and
Sure.
then talk about the longitudinal studies that have been connected to that in terms of outcomes with
Hmm.
the different parenting styles. I found that fascinating
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
correlate parenting styles with actual longitudinal studies and outcomes
Hmm.
related to parenting styles. So
Yeah.
let's start
So
there first. Yeah.
that sounds like a good place to start. Yeah, I wanted to start kind of with this section or this whole chapter that really is very little on theology and much more on just kind of what does the whole kind of um, child psychology, pediatric and psychology worlds say about parenting. What does the research say? What do we know as best practices and so forth? So Diana Baumrind started her work about a little over 50 years ago and came up with this idea that is kind of a typology of parenting styles, a way to classify them. And like you held up that graph, it's got two axes, just like a lot of these four quadrant graph type things. And the horizontal axis has to do with parental responsiveness. So that's kind of the way that parents respond to their children, specifically. uh, Are they looking for input? Is there empathy? Do the children have input into the decisions the family's going to make? Or is it a little bit more completely led by parental choice with little input from the children? So that's the horizontal axis. Then there's a vertical axis there that she originally called demandingness. We'll talk in a minute. I kind of like a little different term for part of that, but so that was kind of demands that parents place on their children. What do we want our children to do? What are our expectations? Whether it's in the house or morals or conduct or where they go in life, all of those kind of school performance, those kind of things. So that creates four quadrants. So you end up with four primary parenting styles. So maybe we'll start with the authoritarian parent that you talked about. That would be a parent who is highly demanding, but not very responsive. That's the parent that would say, when asked the question why, it's because I said so. It's the parent that is going to have lots of high expectations. Of their kids. They're gonna be looking for um, discipline that is more tight control and discipline that's more punitive often. So so that's that quadrant. We might delve into some of these more, but I'll keep going for time's sake to go around the group.
Do what I
The
say, not what I do.
do it perhaps that's interesting. That specific one doesn't come up, but I think in people's lives that one comes up probably substantially. Yes, I think that's so. If we go to the exact opposite, we can go down to the right lower quadrant, which would be parents that are not very demanding but are highly responsive. And so that's kind of the permissive parents. So the parents that really the kids are making most of the decisions. So if asked why, the answer there might be because you want to. From the parent's perspective, these parents will have high ideals of what they want to do with discipline, and sometimes even make threats or promises about what may happen, but often don't follow through with whatever is their leadership because their leadership is trumped by the child's desires and demands. The parents these parents highly value friendship with their kids, and so the kids end up making the vast majority of the decisions. So that's kind of that permissive end of the spectrum.
Okay.
I'll quickly flip back to the other lower quadrant. So the left lower quadrant, this was a quadrant that was not in her original nomenclature, but it belongs there. Um, and I'll explain why in just a second. These are the uh, not highly demanding and not highly responsive parents. So they're basically the disengaged parents. And they would never come and talk to me about their child's behavior problems. They would never, probably not even show up at the doctor's office or at a parenting seminar, and they wouldn't pick up a book, much less my book, because they're just not there. So they may be disengaged or absent because of death or divorce or some other disability that is just keeping them from being involved with the kids. It's important, not so much from a parenting standpoint, but the other way around, because as a pastor, you have undoubtedly dealt with adults who grew up with disengaged parents and may have struggled because of some of those interactions. So that's the reason that really belongs in this chart and system.
Yeah. I
And
think
then
I
the
think
right upper quadrant is parents who are highly demanding and also highly responsive. And so um, Baumrine's initial term for this was authoritative. That's exceedingly confusing and has caused lots of problems in both the literature and in actual practices, because having the term authoritarian and the term authoritative in the same system is kind of, if not very confusing. So you may have read John Sanders' book on prodigals.
yeah.
Yeah. So in that book, he referred to some of her work and he proposed an alternative name for this quadrant, and that was the idea of nurturant parents.
Hmm.
And I really like that. So I've kind of borrowed that from him and like to rename this whole quadrant nurturant. I make some arguments in the book for why that I think that that's a valid term. I don't know that Baumrine would have liked it, but I think it would have implied something in 1970 that it doesn't imply now,
Yeah.
and I think it would have implied to her permissiveness, but I don't think it necessarily implies that now. So
I agree with you.
over
I
time,
like
she
nurturant
added.
so much better.
Yeah, isn't
Yeah.
it? Because it's very confusing. I will say, just to nod to John Sanders on this point as well. He likes to take the authoritative term and push it over into the authoritarian quadrant. So he does another little confusing move there that I think also further confuses the world. I find that among people in theology, specifically in open relational and process theology, that use these terms, a lot of times they'll use those almost interchangeably, authoritative and authoritarian, which is fine. It's just that in the parenting world, authoritative is going to mean something else. So I try to encourage people to avoid authoritative as a term, because I think it gets a little bit confusing.
Yep.
Um, as we know, we're not all always the same person, and we don't act the same all the time. And so we're not always an exactly nurturant parent or authoritarian parent or permissive parent. So over time, Baumrind recognized that there was kind of a need for some in-between categories. And so that's why you have the little ovals that are drawn in there on that graph. She added one called directive, which is highly demanding, but kind of in the middle of the range from responsive. One called democratic, which is highly responsive and kind of middle of the range of demandingness. And then right in the middle, she put one that she called the good enough parent. That's a little different than the psychology child development term good enough parent, but in this case, it means a parent who is middle of the road responsive and middle of the road demanding, and not too extreme on either.
Mhm.
So that sets up the answer to the second part of your question, which was so they looked at longitudinal studies and they said, kind of, what are the outcomes? How do your kids turn out if you follow these different kind of parenting styles and approaches?
Just for people who longitudinal studies
Okay.
accumulate data over the course of several years. versus a slice of time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So these are studies of how kids have turned out, and these would be kids that have been tracked over what what period of
Yeah.
time?
Into a lot of these kids were followed into young adulthood.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. A lot of the data was gathered up through college because that's an easy gathering place of data. So,
Yeah.
and they looked at both presence of positive things like community involvement and the ability to work with others well, some of those kind of attributes. Then they looked at negative attributes like not completing school, depression, anxiety, some of those kind of outcomes. And so they looked at both positive things and negative things. And the interesting thing is the worst outcomes come from authoritarian parents. That may not be surprising, but it may be to some folks. The next worst was actually the group of permissive parents. And so when we get into some of the more modern ways of thinking about parenting, some of them kind of move a little bit into that permissive role, and it's not much better than the full-on authoritarian. Then to further make that interesting, the next group is the disengaged parents. So it's troubling to have a disengaged parent, but it's actually worse for you to have the other two quadrants.
Interesting.
And then next in line becomes the good enough, then the democratic, then the directive, and finally the nurturant parent would be the best model that we could point to. When I talk to families about that,
Maximizing maximizing positive outcomes, minimizing
yes,
negative outcomes.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, and I think when we talk about that, like we know we can't always be in that model, but we can say, hey, in this moment, how can I, as a parent, find a way to be responsive while still giving guidance to my child?
Mm.
And so, in other words, being high in both those axes. The I'm going to go back to that term demandingness that I said I'd kind
Mhm.
of come back to a little bit. I think the word demandingness kind of implies something that's authoritarian in and of itself.
It
With
does. I
with
think
with,
it's a
with that word,
confusing term. Yeah.
yeah, I think so too. So I got to thinking about what are the ways that really applies in the nurturant parent quadrant, and I think it comes down to while authoritarian parents have demands, nurturant parents have aspirations, and they try to guide and empower their children toward those aspirations. So they have places they want their kids to go and things that they hope for them, but they seek to guide and empower them rather than coerce them into that behavior. A lot of times I use this idea of a couple different types of power when comparing these two quadrants. So the authoritarian parent is much more likely to use what some folks have called linear power or unilateral power,
Mhm.
which is more of a an idea that if I'm going to have power in a relationship with you, then I need to control you and coerce you into doing what I need you to do. And so I gain power at your expense. And and those folks tend to think of that as kind of a zero sum thing. So you have less power now and I have more power because I was able to exert power over you.
Mm.
Um, and that's very different than like an idea of relational power, which is the kind of influence that a nurturant parent might want to have. And that's the idea of empowering the other so that we're building relationship. And so actually what happens is both gain because both I'm able to empower you to do something you didn't know how to do before, but I haven't lost by doing
Mm.
that. I've taught you a new skill. I've led you toward a new accomplishment, and through that, our relationship has actually improved,
Mm.
and we've built that relationship.
Mm.
So a nurturing parent would use that kind of an approach more so.
Yeah. 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 So, man, there's so much here. I want to get a lot packed in here
Okay.
with the time that we have. So one thing I want to mention as we go on, if parents are listening, just as a pastor who has worked with parents through the years, I've noticed that one of the biggest shame areas that a person can have is it can revolve around parenting and how are
Yes.
they a good parent? Are they a bad parent? Are they good enough? You know, that whole shame cycle. And like, even if you're listening and you've already raised your kids and then you think back and you do think of all the things that you did wrong, or you're currently trying to be a good parent right now and you have negative outcomes coming in and you can take on personal responsibility for, all there's a lot of shame that can revolve
Hmm.
around parenting, Um, but I want to jump into chapter 4
Okay.
because I think that chapter 4 practically spells out some of the, because you in chapter 2 and 3 you really dive into concepts of God, you critique classical theism, but then in chapter 4 it really the rubber hits the road in terms of parenting. So I think we could talk about chapter 4 and then you could kind of that kind of dip back and forth between God concepts and parental,
Sure.
and how our God concepts can even affect our parenting, right?
Yeah.
And you basically do it by critiquing James Dobson's models that
Hmm.
were so prevalent in the evangelical world, right? We all grew up with James Dobson, basically. I mean, if you're our age, right?
Hmm.
He was he was the dude, and so many parents have been raised on or informed by his view of God, his view
Hmm.
of authority,
Hmm.
his view of how kids have original sin and their spirit needs to be broken. Let's dive into those
Yeah.
things in terms of the authoritarian model of parenting, which has theology attached to it and concepts of God attached to it. Help us with your chapter. Break down chapter
Yeah.
4 for us, if because
Yeah,
that gets.
absolutely, absolutely. So yes, you're right. Dobson was a huge influence uh, for a long time, really through the late nine or all of the 90s, and then, but still has that influence because you can find, and in fact, a couple of the authors that I refer to in that chapter as well are current bestseller books and Christian parenting worlds, and they're following right in Dobson's footsteps on the concepts that he was teaching. So yeah, I think he was a big influence. It's, it's kind of interesting to look back and see that, and a lot of it has to do with that view of authority because classical theism naturally sees God as an authoritative parent. And that's actually kind of one of the things that we do in chapter 2 is kind of say, hey, we in at least in the Judeo-Christian world tend to think of God as a parental figure. And um, and I think for a lot of valid reasons. But then if we do that, then you have to kind of say, but if God is a parent, then based on our theology, what kind of a parent does is God?
Mhm.
So Dobson takes the approach of God is that authoritarian parent who is uh, omnipotent and omniscient and omnipresent and in some way omni-loving. And although for those of us that have dealt with these questions very much, we know that those are really hard to put those few things together, right?
Yeah,
So
he's
there's
very loving, but he'll fry your ass.
right, exactly. Yeah, the definition of love becomes kind of an interesting thing there, right? So if God
I mean,
is
if you take it all in, you try to hold all those pieces together that we tried to hold together. I mean, you end up with a
yeah,
very abusive, alcoholic. What side of the bed's God going to wake up on today? And who's he going to fry? And who's he going to love? And who's he going to bless? And who's he going to curse? And, it's like,
yes.
holy crap.
So, but not only do they see God as that authority, that's a big word, for them, but they see parents as God's ambassador to hold authority over the children. And really with the idea that parents' responsibility is to teach their children obedience to authority or deference to authority, to their authority, so that someday they will defer to God's authority. And so, in that view, parents are a substitute for God's authority here on earth and have that responsibility of being that authoritarian figure so that the kids will follow God.
Hmm.
So back to your point about shame, right? That's a huge responsibility to try to put on somebody. You are a mini version of God that has to be a hardcore authority figure so that someday your kids will follow a similar God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that concept of God, but then also the concept of our human nature. I've become a big advocate for original blessing versus original sin. And
Right.
Dobson and so many conservative Christians and Catholics and evangelicals, and they see, that baby comes out of, and it's such a beautiful thing. It's one of the reasons why I still believe in God, right? But then,
Hmm.
oh, this is a dirty, rotten sinner who's going to go to hell. I better get him baptized. If you're Catholic, that baby dies before you get him baptized is going to burn in hell for all eternity, right?
Yes.
So you've got to break that rebellious, sinful, original sin will so that kid will then submit to the authoritative God. Is that,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely the way that teaching goes. I think I'll just grab a quick quote from Paul David Tripp, who's one of the newer authors that follows in this line. He said, "Remember, it's the sin inside them that messes everything up." So so all of the things that they do, it's the sin it's that idea of that original sin that makes them misbehave, that makes them not make their bed or makes them spill something on the floor, all those things. So yeah, that the idea is that kids, from that perspective, that kids are inherently evil, and that original sin is has got to be they've got to realize their sin and then turn from it. And that's the parent's responsibility. It kind of puts the parents in a pastor's role, from a very conservative pastor's role, right? It's like you've got to convert your children from the very beginning.
You got to beat it out of them if you have to.
Right. And
Seriously,
yes,
like,
yes.
because I want to die. I want to hit the spanking thing, right? But anyway,
Right.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that blows right into the next one, which is their view of discipline. And Dobson was a continued to be an advocate for corporal punishment. I will say he was one who was careful to limit it because he didn't want to see people follow his advice and become um, overly cruel to their children, but his limitations still were excessive, if that makes sense. Like he would say, not more than two slaps with a bare hand, and that
Well,
some of
even
the guides
if I
is.
remember right, he even encouraged you not to use your bare hand, but to get a spoon or like a wooden
Uh-huh.
spoon or something, so that it doesn't. So it gives a separation between the parent physically
Yes.
and an object versus. I is
Right.
that right? Am I remembering correctly? Because
I,
it's
I,
been a
I
while since I read all that stuff.
yes, you are. He had some really really careful guidelines he put, but still they were. He would say things like and teach things like, you go through this spanking ordeal, then your child's will is broken. And then he had the idea that that was the moment that you could have a teaching moment with your child.
Hmm.
But that's absolutely not the moment that you can have a teaching moment with your child
Yeah,
when they've just undergone a physical punishment at the hand of their parent who supposedly loves them.
yeah.
Some of the advocates for spanking from a Christian standpoint will, go to some of those classic passages in the Bible that, like, spare the rod and spoil the child, and they'll try to use that as a reason to hold on to it.
Hmm.
And I do a little. I spend a little time looking at some of those and looking at some maybe scriptural arguments that kind of say, hey, wait a minute, those things may be under the arc of scripture, don't really apply in a literal way like we would think. There's some interesting work when you look at some of the Hebrew scripture kind of instructions for um, punishment of various people with beating, that almost every time, even if it was included in the Hebrew scripture as a punishment, it was a much less harsh punishment than the surrounding countries and the surrounding nations all used. And then if you look over time, it diminished from year to year to year throughout time. So if you look at the arc of Christian scripture, it bent, or of all of scripture, not Christian scripture, it bends toward less and less and less. And so it makes sense that over time we would say, hey, are there alternative ways to discipline our children that don't involve corporal punishment? And the answer is absolutely, there are better choices.
Yeah, tell us what's the science behind that? I mean, we're kind
Yeah,
of
so
talking the theology behind it right now.
right,
What
absolutely.
about the science behind
So
it?
you can look at a few different ways, but since because both the child psychology folks and the pediatric folks have their research out there, and they basically look at it from slightly different angles, but say absolutely better outcomes come from non-corporal modes of punishment. And the studies are very firm on that. And the American Academy of Pediatrics, for now not quite 10 years, has had a strong statement that says that shouldn't be a kind of a valid alternative in a parent's life these days. We should look for methods other than corporal punishment.
It's interesting. And inject a personal thing here, but like I'm the oldest, and then I have three younger sisters who are 5, 6, and 7 years younger than me. My dad is very loving. He's 90. My mom's 89, and they go to
Hmm.
my church, and we talk every day, right? But I was spanked. I was
Yeah,
physically disciplined. He was too. And so he just did what his dad did, and of course, there wasn't guidelines out from my dad when he was first
right.
a parent, right? And I was born in '61, so. But what was interesting was my oldest sister, dad tried to spank her like he spanked me, and I would become compliant, and then I still might go off and do my own thing. I got spanked at school and by dad. It was always a double jeopardy for me. I had my principal paddle me, and then my dad, and then but my oldest sister would have been like one of Dobson's strong-willed child, and
Okay.
like you could have spanked her and never changed her will through.
Hmm.
I mean, you could have beat her to death, and you wouldn't have changed her.
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And thank God my dad was sensitive enough to that, because as he tried to discipline her like he did me, it wasn't working, and
Hmm.
there was nobody to talk to except for our pediatrician, Dr. McEachin. And thank God for Dr. McEachin, because he says, well, some kids don't respond well to this. And he started giving my dad's other alternatives. Like
Yeah.
for my oldest sister, it was always a sit down and a talk,
Uh-huh.
and just talking with her through things was far more beneficial than
Sure.
just about anything else, And so I was kind of proud of my dad that he was able to adjust
That's really good.
his parenting styles
Yeah, to put that in
mid
terms of
course.
kind of something we've already talked about. So, uh, Dr. McEachin, was
That
that
was
it?
our
Yeah.
pediatrician
So
growing
Dr.
up. Yeah.
McEachin was encouraging your dad to increase his responsiveness, right?
Yes.
So
100%.
yeah, so
Yeah.
he was encouraging him to listen to her and then to have a conversation,
Mm-hmm.
and which builds relationship and moved him in that nurtured direction. That's
Yep.
exactly what he was doing.
Yep. 100%. So yeah. So between this child psychologist and the child what was the other one that you were talking about?
Pediatricians, yeah, our group, yeah.
Yeah. Both of them are coming to similar conclusions in terms of corporal punishment.
Yeah, and I'll actually read real quickly from the American Academy of Pediatrics statement. This was 2018, and they said, quote, Parents, other caregivers, and adults interacting with children and adolescents should not use corporal punishment, including hitting and spanking, either in anger or as a punishment for or consequence of misbehavior, nor should they use any disciplinary strategy, including verbal abuse, that causes shame or humiliation. So that was the conclusion after they looked at kind of a meta-analysis of the data.
Interesting. So, chapter 5, you go into open relational parenting and give us some paradigms for that. Guide and empower love, responsiveness, and nurturant, which is a balance between responsiveness and demanding.
Yep.
So let's talk through some of the practical sides of what this looks like when we. And I think you've done a great job at showing how this can also be viewed as a, reorient ourselves to a conception of God
Yes.
that is uncontrolling love versus top down authoritative
Right.
approach, and also it integrates well with the best research that we have out for raising kids. So I love the way you've tried to integrate both of those things.
Yeah, exactly. And we've kind of danced around it, and you've spent plenty of time with some other guests with this idea of open and relational theology and process theology and their relationship together. So this is my view of open and relational parenting is obviously heavily dependent on open and relational theology, because I think if you see God from that perspective, then it lets us kind of back to the subtitle, reflect that love to our children, and we can emulate the type of love that God gives us to our children. So kind of a very different way of emulating God to our kids, not from an authority standpoint, but through a love standpoint. So so I think that's kind of the basis for the connection there. And then we can do a lot of different things when we think about what does that love look like. I like Tom's view of the three kind of primary Greek words that Christian folks in particular will talk about when it comes to love. And
Yeah,
you've heard plenty of sermons and probably given your own that kind of talked about agape, philia,
eros.
and eros love. Yes.
And I
Um,
like the little because of love, alongside of love, in spite of love. So yeah, break that down for
Yeah.
us a little bit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that kind of comes from Tom's work, and I thought it really fit with parenting really well. So in Eros love, sometimes we think about that specifically as erotic, but Tom helps us see that perhaps a little bit as because of something about you that I love you, right? So he calls Eros love as because of love. And we can see that most easily in our kids. Like you alluded to this earlier, like the very first minute you see them and you pick them up and they're in a little blanket at the hospital, and you look at their face and you go, okay, because you are who you are, I love you. And we can continue to do that throughout their lives and see, because of these things that you just inherently are, you are worthy of love, and I love you. And so that because of love, I think is really helpful to parents in that way. The next one maybe philia love. Sometimes people call that brotherly love. I found an interesting reference to where this was used, it kind of alluding to Greek soldiers. So they would perhaps have a task to do together, be brothers in arms, so to speak, and they would be working alongside each other to accomplish this task, whatever it was. So that idea of alongside of love, working with another person and developing relationship and love there. We can see that you can use that so many ways in parenting when it comes to working on a craft or project or puzzle, when your kids are working on trying to learn a new skill, and you come in and just kind of help them see the next best step, and scaffold them, that it would be a term kind of from early child development that would say, we're going to give them just a little bit of a hint toward what to do next and let them learn this skill on their own. That could be as simple as talking about tying your shoes, and you might just loop the thread over the lace over just in the right way so that they could see the right next step. So, uh, teaching and empowering through alongside of love, and then agape. Sometimes we think of that as God's love for us, but Tom points out that really it's got to do with God's love for us in spite of the ugly thing we've done or the mean thing we've done. It kind of implies that grace. And so when you think about that as parents love their kids in spite of, it's, oh, I love you in spite of the fact that you just dumped the nail polish on the carpet and have ruined it. So it gives us the opportunity to say, yes, you did that, but I still love you. And I love you in spite of that thing that you did that wasn't so nice, or the way that you looked at me and as if you were very angry, or the way that you had a temper tantrum. And then we'll grab temper tantrums for a second there, and then that lets us kind of go, okay, I love you despite that, so I recognize that right now what you need is me to come down to your level and give you a big hug,
Mm.
as opposed to having a combative response to them. It lets us love them in spite of what they've done. So that I find those kind of applications really helpful.
Fascinating. Yeah, good. I did a 2-year training with Tara Brock and Jack Cornfield on mindful meditation. And so
Yeah.
I'm a certified mindful meditation teacher. And what was fascinating to me was, how, like, when you talked about chapter 6, you talk about temper tantrums, childhood fears, and teenage conflict. And as you were talking through those things from an open relational parenting
Uh-huh.
perspective, everything that you recommended fit really well with mindful meditation. So, for example,
Mhm.
your childhood temper tantrums, we sit as we sit with ourselves. Um, we identify our feelings.
Mhm.
Permission to feel all the research around the feeling wheel. And when I fell apart and went to rehab, I had to learn how to to identify my feelings, and those were important. And I pushed them
Yes.
away and didn't deal with them for so long. If you're gonna cry, I'm gonna give you something to cry about. I pushed all my feelings down and tried to battle them, and instead of allowing them, like there's this practice of mindful meditation called RAIN,
Mhm.
where it's kind of how you downregulate your amygdala, and it's RAIN. R is recognize
Okay.
and then A is allow it rather than trying to push it away. And then I is investigate it. What's going on here? Here's the feeling. Here's the emotion. Here's the thoughts. Here's how it's affecting me. Why? What's going on? And then the N is nurture.
Yeah.
You provide self compassion, non judgment to yourself. But it's so when you were
That's
talking,
those are great. Those are
I
great parallels. I really like
I
that.
was just like going, this is crazy. Like mindful meditation and parenting go together.
Yeah.
A good
Yeah.
parent.
And if you think about it, I mean, you could turn it both ways. You could say that in mindful meditation, in a way, you're parenting yourself in that
Yeah,
moment.
I think you are. It's
Yeah.
literally like you're reparenting yourself.
Hmm.
Yeah, because
And
when I was, you know, when you have your amygdala is negatively oriented anyway, right? It's
hmm
a negativity bias, right? The fight, flight, fear part of us that stores trauma and all that stuff. And then so you've got that naturally, but then you throw, original sin theology on top of that, and you're a dirty, rotten sinner. So then you end up with this huge self critic.
hmm
Got a horrible self critic, right? Because I grew up with amygdala and theology that reinforced it.
hmm
So learning how to love myself and show self compassion and be non judgmental, and these things have helped heal me, reparent me, if you want to put it that way.
hmm
So interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, and the other thing that is another connection that you can spin it the other way is that as you parent a child through those things, you're teaching them that mindful meditation. But
I
you're
think you
walking
really
through
are.
like exactly the little rain metaphor that or the rain example that you used
Uh-huh.
there. I think that,
Yeah, so fast. So I like on the temper tantrums, you're rather than trying to stifle that kid's feelings,
Mhm.
his amygdala is activated, right?
Right,
And you're trying to teach them how to get in touch with their feelings and identify them and help
right.
them.
And depending on the age of the child, you have to think about, do they even understand, do they know what those feelings are at all? Right? Like,
Yeah, 2 or 3, you're just
right. You don't know what anger is and so forth. So sometimes helping them see by saying, "Hey, when I get angry, sometimes my face gets red, or sometimes I start to shake, or sometimes I hold my fist really hard." And so when you feel yourself doing those things, then that might be that you're angry. That's not going to be a 2 or 3 year old, but that might be a 5 or 6 year old that you're talking to there. So helping them understand their feelings. Sometimes parents we're real tempted to say things like use your words, but sometimes they don't have the words yet. And
yeah.
so they don't have
Sometimes
that
I don't even have the
vocabulary.
words yet.
Right. So kind of helping them walk through that, and
Yeah.
maybe by giving them choices, maybe by saying, "Hey, I wonder if you feel this way or if you feel this way." And then they are given a couple options to say, "Oh, this kind of feels like that." And as they get older, you use more complicated language and help them connect to those ideas. Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for mindful meditation, and it should have a stronger place in our entire world, I think.
I think you also learn how emotions, crest. It's like waves, they come, they crest, and then they always subside.
Yes.
So you can allow your kid to crest
Yeah,
without punishing them. You know what I mean? And
absolutely. And
um,
sometimes I'll tell parents that in the middle of that, as you think about why your child had a particular temper tantrum, you need to think about, okay, so what do they need? They may need redirection. So they may need to think about some other options for what I can do since I'm not getting to do the thing that I was frustrated that I can't do. But they may just need a moment. And so your first response is maybe to get down on their level, hug them, say I love you, but then you might say, sometimes when I feel frustrated, I need a moment by myself. So I'm going to give you a moment by yourself, but I'm right here if you need me. And let that crest. I think that's a good way to say it.
mm, yeah, it's been fascinating to think through those lenses. Of course, teenage years can, your freedom versus your responsibility, and
Yes.
whoa,
Yeah.
that's
That's
always. I mean, the twos, threes, and then the teens. It's like,
right. Yeah, completely different world. And if you think about it, you know, from say age 12, we'll just kind of randomly pick an age, to age 18, you're really wanting to help your child learn that responsibility so that when they head off to the college campus, that they can actually do their laundry and that they choose to do to do it, and that they can set some time frames on when they're going to study, and so they can actually eat a few vegetables in their life, and some things that we know are healthy things. But if we if we want to do that, it's a gradual process. So sometimes I'll talk about those two things going together. I think I refer to this in that chapter that you're talking about. But I think back to Spider-Man and when he first got his powers. So Peter Parker's first got these powers, and his uncle used the phrase, "With great power comes great responsibility." Well, I like with teenagers to flip that around a little bit and say, "With great freedom comes great responsibility." So as teenagers want more freedom, then they can show more responsibility over time, but we can teach them how to do that and give them more responsibility. And if we don't, and we expect to be a tightly controlling authoritarian parent up to the day they're 17 years and 11 months, and we think that they're going to launch very successfully a month later, then we're probably fooling ourselves. So I think that you start thinking about that time several years ahead and thinking, how can I empower my kids to be able to develop these skills that they're going to need, and they're going to be able to develop responsibility. And I think it takes a lot more empowerment than authoritative control to do that.
It's interesting. It made me think of like the Amish.
Hmm.
You know how they raise their kids in this community, but then when they hit a certain age, I can't remember what they call it. They actually have a name for it, where the
Oh, uh-huh.
kids actually Rob Springer. They the kids literally leave the community for a year and typically these kids. There's movies on this. They just go crazy.
Yeah,
They're I mean they're doing partying, doing drugs, all.
because they don't know any of that stuff,
Then
right?
they have to decide whether they want to go back to the Amish community or leave it. But it's almost like when you watch the movies on it, some of them are documentaries that I've watched,
Uh-huh.
and it's like they were kind of raised in a pretty authoritarian environment in this Amish
Hmm.
community with all the rules and everything. And then they're all of a sudden just got all this freedom in the world. I mean, I even saw this at Baylor. I went to Baylor,
Hmm.
and a lot of these Southern Baptist kids for the first time had freedom,
Hmm.
and they just went crazy at college. Some of them, just flunking out and partying themselves to death and
Right.
never went to class and, all this kind of stuff. It was the first time they'd ever had any kind of freedom on their own.
Right. So they didn't know, even back to what we were saying a minute ago, they didn't even know those emotions and feelings and responsibilities and things like
Yeah. The first freshman runs we did were, anyway, I won't go there.
that.
So, well, what would you like to say? Well, because we're running out of time, but what what
Hmm.
what would you like to say to wrap this up? And I by the way, I just bought the book over Amazon. I should have got one when I was with you in Minneapolis recently and got you to sign it, doggone it.
Yeah.
Anyway, but
Yeah.
I'm holding it up for those who are viewing on YouTube. Here's the book, Open and Relational Parenting. What would you like to say? They can pick it up at Amazon. Do you have a website out or anything like that?
Amazon's the primary place. I also write on Substack and
What's your Substack?
open and relational parenting, or you can just look my name up, Chris Hanson.
Okay.
Both will work. Um, and yeah, I put out something a couple times a month on Substack, and I'm very open to DMs or whatever kind of messaging through that. That's my primary. I avoid social media for a lot of reasons, but that's my safe space for social media at this point. But people can get in touch with me and contact me there as well. Um, I have a bit of a presence on openandrelationalparenting.com, but probably Substack's even the better
Okay.
spot to get in touch with me. I think it, if I were just going to leave like some last thoughts, I think we kind of hinted at this, but I think parents shouldn't be afraid to parent themselves and love themselves as they raise their kids. And I think that may be part of the way that we respond to this idea of shame that we get from holding up some other standards or maybe even false standards that we have out there. I did a brief series. It's on Substack of parenting failures. Um, uh, and our mutual friend Mike Brennan asked me
Hmm?
to speak or to join him on a podcast that he was doing about failure. And he said, "Why don't you talk about parenting failure?" And so I came up with a few, but interestingly, one of them I referred to as pseudo failure or pseudo parenting failure. The idea that we set standards up for ourselves based on what we think others expect of us or what we think we see them presenting in social media or through the mom's group or at the restaurant or whatever. And we think, oh, they're a great parent, but I'm not holding myself up to that. I'm not fulfilling that. And that's kind of pseudo parenting failure. Interestingly, that's the second most popular article on my Substack. And I think it hit home with a lot of folks. So anyway, the idea of parenting ourselves in the same way that we want to love our children and
Mm.
let us love ourselves in that same way.
Mm. I love that. I love it. I think my observation of pastoring lots of people through the years is that the conservative Catholics and the conservative evangelical crowd are the most guilt-ridden
Mm,
and have the harshest internal critics of anybody I've ever worked with.
maybe so.
And
Yeah.
when I sit with and I think it's probably because there's more of them. Catholicism is the largest denomination in America, and Southern Baptist is the largest Protestant denomination.
Mm-hmm.
So both of those have, deeply original sin ideas and all that kind of stuff, and very much authoritarian gods and authoritarian parenting models, which I think leads to harsh inner critics kind of stuff. And I think that learning self-compassion, love of God, love of neighbor, the love of self, and like we kind of shied away from that, I think, in those circles. It's like, well, you can't trust yourself. Why are you going to raise your kid up to have agency? Because that's you got to beat it out. It's
right.
It's and then you get into the danger of submitting to inappropriate authority because you've beat it into your kids all their lives that they should submit to authority, right? And
yeah, that's a really good point.
Anyway, I love the work that you've done here, and I appreciate it. I will I'll put it out there as much as I can.
Yeah, thank you, Fred. I really appreciate that.
Excellent
those
stuff.
are kind words.
I actually recommend it for pastoring and for parenting and for parenting ourselves, and even for healing ourselves emotionally. It's good stuff. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much. I really enjoyed our conversation, Fred.
Well, me too. I appreciate you doing it.
Yep.
So hopefully I'll see you in 2026 somewhere.
Yes. Yeah, there will be probably several opportunities.
I hope so.
I think Theology Beer Camp's coming to your hometown, huh?
It is. I was blown away.
Yeah.
I even know the church. I reached out to the pastor there because I don't know that pastor, but because Jonathan Foster and I are trying to build some synergy around open relational theology. We're going to start doing a second Monday night event for theological conversations around this kind of open relational stuff. So anyway, yeah.
Perfect.
All right.
We look forward to seeing you at some of those events.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And everybody, thanks for tuning in to Spirituality Adventures. We'll see you next time. Hey, you made it to the end. Thanks for listening all the way through on this episode. By the way, if you're not already a supporter, go to spiritualityadventures.com, sign up for one of our monthly supports, and you will receive our bonus content. You'll receive lots of interesting information about our guests. Many of our musicians will do special bonus songs and record a song. So I want to encourage you to do that. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Be sure and subscribe. Be sure and share any of the episodes that you like. And be sure and make comments if you like them as well. This helps us get Spirituality Adventures out there to more listeners, more watchers. So whatever platform you're using, subscribe, like, share, make comments, and go to our website, sign up for our team, and be a part of the team support. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.